How's it going, everyone? It's Matt from RideHub here, and on this episode of Trail Physics, we're going to be looking at the Big Rock Roll Down on Rupert here in Squamish. So for those of you who've been watching previous episodes of Trail Physics, you're probably starting to notice a bit of a theme. A lot of the big moves in this town involve rolling down over large rocks. And trails like Leave of Absence and Rupert, which are great for intermediate and advanced intermediate riders, are made up of rock roll after rock roll and can provide a very reasonable amount of progression. All of those rolling moves use a skill we call the roll down lunge. And on this particular move on Rupert, it's no different. So this is the last rock roll move on Rupert, and while it's not the biggest or longest, it is definitely the steepest. And while a lot of riders might be confident with the previous rock moves, they tend to skip this one. So we're gonna dig into why riders tend to skip this move, why they hesitate to ride it, then we're gonna look at the safest technique possible to ride this rock. Let's go take a look from the top. So here we are at the run-in for the Big Rock Roll Down. And as you can see, it's not exactly a smooth entrance. On the best of days, this is a pretty bumpy run-in to the move. On slick or wet days, these roots can be causing you to pinball all around the trail. And you have to remember, if your confidence gets zapped on this run-in, it's probably gonna mess with your head before you hit the rock move. Now, as we get up to the actual move, you can start seeing a bit of the problem. It's completely blind. Now, take any normal feature, make the entrance to it blind, you've just increased the difficulty level and the challenge substantially. And that throws a ton of people off. And remember, if it was really slippery on the run-in, it's going to make your brain start thinking about how slippery this is going to be. Now, like most big roll downs, there are three very common errors people have a tendency to present. The first issue we see is that timid riders hesitate at the top. They'll have a tendency to turn their handlebar left or right in order to maintain their balance, which will throw off their line, rolling into the move. The worst case scenario is they're too close to the edge when that happens, and instead their front wheel slides sideways off the rock instead of rolling down it. The second common error we see is people have a tendency to move their body weight too far back as they roll over the edge. This is because the move is steep and their brain is telling them to get their weight back so they don't fall forward over the handlebars. If a rider's weight's too far back as they roll down the obstacle, when they get to the bottom they G out, they lose control of their steering and their braking on the run out. And the third, and probably the most common thing we see on this rock move, is the rider riding over the move from a tall, neutral position. This means their center of mass is really high up as they roll over the obstacle, which impacts their stability and balance. Let's go back up to the top of the run-in, take a look at the line, and then take a look at the roll-down move. So from the top, we've just come down the trail, and we now get the option to go left for the ride around, or go right to do the rock move. And unfortunately, the rubber chicken's missing. Now, the first part of the run-in's pretty benign for about the first 20 to 30 feet, and then it starts getting very, very chunky and very, very rooty. The important thing to remember here is to be in a good ready position so you can deal with all the undulations in the terrain. If you're riding with your arms and legs really, really stiff, you're gonna feel every single one of these bumps, and it's gonna zap a lot of your momentum and speed. And what can sometimes happen if you're riding really stiff is that you end up parking your front tire in one of these divots, and you end up going over the bars. And in my time on this trail today, I've already seen that happen once. So a good engaged ready position and eyes looking down the trail is gonna provide us with the most success on this run-in. And again, when this is wet, these roots can be very, very slippery, so they tend to ping pong your bike around the trail. The further down trail you look, the less concerned you're gonna be with what you're riding over. As we move down this run-in, it starts opening up a little bit, flattening out, smoothing out, and we start seeing the leading edge to the roll down. So from here, the line I'm going to be taking is wide around on the right so I can line up well for the entrance to the roll down. I'm going to stay to the right of this root knuckle right here and follow this path around the outside. As I come around that root, I'm going to stay to the right of this rock here, and I still can't see over the edge of my roll down, but this is the line I want to be on. Now from here, I could look over the edge, put a stick on the trail, and use that as a marker. However, instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this tree down here as a means to line myself up. As I approach, I have this last little dip on the rock, and I can now start seeing a bit of the exit. From this point, I still can't actually see over the edge of the move. In order to see over this edge, I have to get really close to it. And it's because this rock is actually really steep. And that's one of the biggest reasons people hesitate and don't want to ride this move. Now looking at the edge of this rock, it appears we have a little bit of leeway. However, if we look closer, off the left-hand side here, the rock drops off very substantially and creates a bit of a bomb hole. Now where the rock transitions to the wood bridge, the smoothest area is right down the middle. And the same thing applies to the rocks at the exit. So I'm going to try to stay down the middle of this wood bridge as much as possible. Now looking at it from the bottom confirms a lot of what we saw at the top. Not only is that the smoothest transition, but it's also the most commonly ridden line, and you can tell by the wet mud on the rock. So it's going to be really important we stay on our line during this roll down. Part of the reason for that is as we come down this roll down, as we look towards our exit, we start to see the trail fade away on the right-hand side, and we've got some trees and other obstacles we want to avoid. So once we've completed this move, it's super important so we keep the bike under control and we're able to keep our eyes moving up trail. So to execute a roll down lunge, we're going to use the following steps. As I approach the edge of this obstacle, the first thing I'm going to do is get myself into a low ready position. By creating a deep bend in my knees and elbows, I've now lowered my center of mass. I've also increased my range of motion on top of the bike, which is very important for the next move. Once I'm in my low ready position, as I approach the edge of the roll down, I'm actually going to look or peek over the edge of the handlebar and down the obstacle. Now I've looked or peeked over the handlebar and moved my body weight slightly forward for two very specific reasons. The first is that on very steep moves, by moving my body forward, I'm able to see over very steep edges to ensure I'm riding down the line I want to be. The second and more important reason why we've done the look or peek is because I've now increased my range of motion even further for the next part of the move. And that part of the move is the lunge. Because my body weight is slightly forward as I'm rolling over the edge, I'm able to push the handlebars and guide the front wheel down the obstacle. This means my body stays in the same position, but I'm actually just moving the bicycle. The body position I'm in at this point looks very similar to my weight being really far back, but you'll notice I'm much further down the obstacle when this has happened. If I was to be in this body position at the very beginning, the front end would be very light as I roll over the obstacle, and I would have no control of the bicycle. Once I've completed the lunge, I'm now resetting myself back into a good ready position to be prepared for the next part of the trail. By lunging the bike down the obstacle, you've now positioned your center of mass behind the center of the bike. This is why it's critically important that you get back into a centered ready position as you roll through the G-out at the bottom of the obstacle. Now, what's important to remember about your braking on a move like this, as we begin rolling over the edge of this obstacle, we want to begin letting off of our brakes so the bike can roll smoothly down the rock, over this transition, and down the wood. Because of how steep this rock is, there's no possible way we can be slowing the bike down here, so we need to allow it to roll. This wood at the bottom can become a little waterlogged and covered in mud, which can also make it a hair slick. Now your bike tires want to roll in a straight line, and as long as you let them, they probably will. If you start trying to apply heavy brakes on wet, muddy wood, the bike will have a tendency to want to wash left or right. So we're instead going to allow the bike to continue rolling down this obstacle, and once we get off of the wood, we can begin applying heavy braking in order to prepare for our left turn at the end. Because this is a steep move, you're going to pick up a lot of speed, so it's important that you keep your eyes up, looking down trail, so you can be prepared for the amount of speed you have at the exit, and you can keep the bike under control. And that's it. That's the Big Rock Roll on Rupert here in Squamish. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of Trail Physics with RideHub. Do us a favor, if you like the video, click the like button, and please click subscribe. It helps us continue making this content. Now close your computer, put down your phone, and go ride your bike.